Thea's engagement ring burned hotter each dawn, counting down to damnation. In 4 nights, the moon's magic would chain her forever to the alpha who'd murdered her father on sun-baked stones, then slid this cursed band on her trembling finger and called it peace. Her grandmother died whispering the forbidden knowledge. A willing gift breaks the bond. Find someone kind, someone safe. She found Prince Matthias on a moonlit terrace, but the man who removed his bronze wolf mask wasn't the gentle scholar. It was his another cage again. Before we learn who Thea chose and the devastating outcome of her new unwanted choice, please subscribe, hit the like button, and let's get carried away completely together. The ring burned. It wasn't a metaphor. On the 67th morning, Thea woke with a searing pain across her knuckle, as if the band of white gold was slowly cooking the bone beneath her skin. She jerked upright in the gray pre-dawn light, her breath fogging in the chill of the rented chamber, and clutched her hand to her chest. The phantom echo of her grandmother's voice, raspy with age and urgency, coiled through her skull. Willing gift, before the moon, or be damned forever. She uncurled her fist. The ring, deceptively delicate, seemed to drink the weak light. Its central stone wasn't a gem, but a sliver of captured moon rock, milky and opaque, and it pulsed now with a faint, sickly heat. 4 days. The mating moon rose in 4 nights, and when it reached its zenith, the magic sealed. Her life, her breath. Her very heartbeat would be tethered to Alistair, alpha of the Blood Peak pack. The man who had looked her father in the eye, called lawful challenge, and ripped his throat out on the sun-baked stones of their own courtyard. The man who had then taken her cold hand, slid this ring onto her finger, and called it a blessing, a merger, a peace offering. Peace. Thea tasted bile. It was conquest, polished and presented as destiny. She rose, the rough wool of her blanket falling away. The room in this nameless border town inn was a far cry from her family's sun-drenched halls, now occupied by Blood Peak warriors. Here, the air smelled of damp mortar and old ale. Here she could plan. Her grandmother's forbidden lore, whispered in the sacred, secret tongue of the exiled moon priestesses, was her only map. The bond could be broken. Not by force, but by transfer. A willing gift of the ring to another, before the moon's peak. The original tether would snap, the magic seeking the new recipient. It had to be a true gift, free of coercion. It had to be secret, and it had to be done now. Her target was Prince Matthias. The king's younger brother was a figure of courtly gossip and gentle ridicule, a scholar who preferred dusty scrolls to sparring yards, a man who flinched at the scent of blood. He was perfect, kind, predictable, and most importantly, non-threatening. At the king's solstice ball tonight, masked and anonymous, she would find him. She would weave a tale of a desperate, unrequited love, beg him to hold her token for luck, just for the night. She would place the ring in his unsuspecting hand. The bond would latch onto his gentle, unguarded soul just long enough to sever Alistair's claim. Then, in the chaos of the unmasking at midnight, she would retrieve it and vanish into the night, a free woman. It was a cruel trick to play on a gentle soul, a stain on her honor. But honor was a luxury for the unbound. For her, it was survival. The king's fortress, Ravenspire, wasn't built for beauty. It was a fist of black basalt clenched against the mountains, and the solstice ball within its great hall was a riot of color and noise strung across a field of latent power. Thea moved through the throng, a silvery minnow in a river of jewel-toned velvets and predatory grace. Her mask, a simple half-face of fox fur, itched. Every laugh was too sharp, every scent, bergamot, sage, musk, the underlying tang of wolf, was an assault. She carried the echo of her family's hearth smoke in her lungs, and it clashed with all of this. She saw Alistair across the hall. He wore the mask of a snarling bear, gilded, but she'd know the arrogant set of his shoulders anywhere. He was holding court, no doubt boasting of his upcoming nuptials, of the fertile valleys now his. Her stomach turned. The ring flared, a hot pulse of warning, of possession. Not for long, she thought, the words a frantic chant in her mind. Then she saw the bronze wolf. Prince Matthias's signature mask, as everyone knew. He stood alone on a quieter terrace overlooking the mist-choked gardens, a silhouette of thoughtful solitude. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The terrace was dim, lit only by torches that guttered in the icy breeze. The strains of the lute from the hall seemed distant, warped. Her rehearsed speech, so polished in her lonely room, dissolved into ash on her tongue. As she approached, her steps silent on the frost-rimed stone, he turned. Not with a start, but with a slow, considered movement. The bronze wolf mask regarded her, the eye-holes dark. "You seem lost, lady." The voice was deeper than she'd imagined Matthias's would be, a rumble that vibrated in the hollow of her chest. It held no mockery, only a quiet, patient curiosity. It threw her. She'd prepared for kindness, not this profound stillness. She faltered, her hand going to the pouch at her belt where the ring lay hidden, now burning a hole through the velvet. I am seeking a moment's respite, and a kindness." He said nothing, merely inclined his head. The encouragement was in the tilt of his mask, in the way his gloved hand rested open on the stone balustrade. It was all the invitation her desperation needed. The words tumbled out, a broken, pathetic thing. "There is a man, a bond I cannot bear. My heart is given elsewhere, a hopeless cause. I have only this." She fumbled with the pouch, her fingers numb. The ring tumbled into her palm, glowing with its own captured moonlight. "Will you keep it? For tonight? Just hold it, so that I may know a single hour of freedom from its weight? A token, for a lost cause." She didn't wait for permission. Terror of Alistair finding her, of the moon climbing higher, made her reckless. She reached for his hand where it lay on the balustrade. He didn't pull away. His fingers were long, the leather of his glove cool. With a trembling motion, she slid the ring onto his index finger. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. It was not a gentle connection. It was a violent forging. A white-hot lance of pure magic exploded from the ring, up her arm, and speared through her core. It wasn't the bond she'd felt with Alistair, a dull, oppressive chain. This was a live wire, a torrent of raw, untamed power that flooded her senses. She felt not just a presence, but an essence. Vast, disciplined, and terrifyingly focused, like a glacier hiding a volcano. It was too much, too vast all at once. The world vanished in a scream of sensation. Her knees buckled, the cold stone of the terrace rushing up to meet her. She heard a gasp that was her own, distant and thin. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard a different sound, a soft, deliberate scrape. Then silence. Blinking back tears of shock and pain. Thea forced her head up. The world swam back into focus, sharp and horribly clear. The man was removing his mask, not the quick, cheerful motion of Prince Matthias, but a slow, deliberate revelation. First, the strong line of a jaw, shadowed with dark stubble. Then, a mouth set in a hard, unsmiling line. Finally, the eyes. They were not Matthias's warm hazel. They were the color of a winter sky at twilight, gray and piercing, and they looked down at her with an intelligence that was neither gentle nor scholarly. It was the assessing, calculating stare of a strategist surveying an unexpected, but potentially useful battlefield. Torrin Ravenscar, the Wolf King. He looked from her pale, horror-struck face to the ring now sitting snug on his finger. It glowed fiercely, its milky stone lit from within, a beacon declaring the irreversible. She saw his own pupils flare, felt a second, sharper jolt through the bond as he consciously pulled on it, testing its strength. His expression didn't change, but she saw the understanding flash in those wintry eyes. This was no romantic trinket. This was a moon-forged bonding ring, and it had just fused his soul to a stranger. His gaze swept over her, past her, taking in the empty terrace, the timing, her obvious terror. He did not see a tragic romantic. He saw a move on the board, a desperate noble house, a trap by a rival, an attempt to ensnare the crown with forbidden magic. His lips tightened, not in shock, but in cold, swift deduction. Before she could choke out a word, an explanation, a plea, he moved. He bent, his movement fluid and powerful, and gripped her arm. His touch was not cruel, but it was immovable. Like iron wrapped in velvet. He hauled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. Her legs threatened to give way again, but the bond, that terrifying new channel between them, thrummed with a sudden imperative energy, propping her up. "Do not speak," he said, his voice low but carrying a king's absolute authority. It vibrated through the bond, a dual command she felt in her marrow. He turned, keeping her pinned to his side, and strode back toward the blazing light and deafening noise of the great hall. She was a leaf caught in a torrent. The doors loomed, the music swelled. With a final, crushing glance at her, a look that promised a reckoning, Torrin Ravenscar crossed the threshold and into the heart of his court. A hush fell, rippling out from the doors like a stone dropped in a pond. 1,000 eyes turned, masks and faces, a sea of curiosity and sharp attention. He stopped at the center of the dais, pulling Thea up beside him. The ring on his hand shone like a fallen star. He did not shout. He simply spoke, and the court magic woven into the rafters carried his voice to every stone, every ear, every suddenly still heart. By the moon's own magic, a bond is sealed. He paused, letting the gasps, the whispers rise and then die. His gray eyes scanned the crowd, finding faces, reading reactions, even as his grip on Thea's arm remained absolute. "This woman," he declared, his voice final as a tomb ceiling, "is mine." The words were not a question, not a joyful announcement. They were a decree, a fait accompli, a political landmine detonated with glacial precision. Thea's own breath was trapped in her lungs. Her eyes, wide and blind with panic, swept the stunned crowd, and they found, near the front, Prince Matthias. His simpler badger mask was pushed to the top of his head, his face a canvas of utter, bewildered shock. His gaze was locked on the ring on his brother's hand, his mouth slightly agape. Then movement behind him, a parting in the crowd. There, framed by the great archway, stood Alistair. His bear mask was gone. His face was a mask of its own, a terrifying sculpture of fury, his eyes black with rage, fixed first on the king, then on Thea, then on the glowing ring. She saw the moment his understanding crystallized, the moment possession turned to a vicious public theft. His lips peeled back from his teeth in a silent snarl that promised not war, but annihilation. Torrin's hand bearing her ring tightening its hold on her, a possessive claim in front of the kingdom. The bond between them vibrated with the shock of the court, the heat of Alistair's rage, and the cold, uncharted territory of a future forged in a single, catastrophic mistake. The cage she had fled was gone. In its place was a precipice, and she was already falling. The world narrowed to the vice grip of Torrin's hand on her arm, and the blinding, buzzing tunnel of light and sound as he marched her from the dais. The bond was a live wire, screaming with the feedback of 1,000 stares, 1,000 whispered speculations. She heard none of the words, only a roar like a distant waterfall. Her body moved, but she felt disconnected from it, a puppet whose strings had been savagely knotted to a stranger's will. They left the heat and glare of the great hall for the throat-clenching cold of a private corridor. The stone here was raw, untreated, sucking warmth and sound into its ancient pores. Torrin did not speak. His silence was more terrible than any outburst. It was the silence of a man reassessing a battlefield, calculating new vectors of attack. His emotions, through the bond, were a fortress of ice, but she felt the tremors in it, the seismic shock of the connection he had not sought, a profound violation of his sovereign self. It wasn't hurt. It was a cold, incandescent fury. He did not take her to a dungeon. He took her to a tower. The chamber at the top of the west spire was vast, beautiful, and utterly lifeless. A gilded cage. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, but the heat didn't penetrate the innate chill of the space. The windows were arches of leaded glass overlooking a sheer drop to the misty abyss below. The furnishings were rich, deep blue velvet drapes, a bed piled with furs, a carved oak table, but they held no personal imprint. No scent of previous occupation, no stray book, no discarded glove. It was a stage set for a queen consort, never used. Torin released her arm only when the heavy oak door thudded shut behind them, the sound final as a tomb seal. The sudden absence of his physical touch made the psychic imprint of the bond scream louder. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her throat, her other arm wrapping around herself. He did not look at her. He walked to the hearth, his back to her, and stared into the flames. The ring on his finger caught the firelight, winking maliciously. He was a silhouette of controlled power, his broad shoulders tense beneath the dark velvet of his doublet. The silence stretched, thick enough to choke on. Explain. The word was not a question. It was a command, low and flat, stripped of all courtly ornament. Thea's voice was a ragged thing, torn from a place raw with panic. It was a mistake. I never meant... I was aiming for Prince Matthias. I thought you were him. The mask, the terrace. Aim. He turned then, and the word hung in the air, sharp as a blade. His gray eyes were chips of flint. You aimed a bonding ring, a moon-forged life-joining artifact. You aimed it at my brother. He took a single, deliberate step toward her. The fire cast his face in shifting planes of light and shadow. You expect me to believe this was an errant toss of a love token? You, Thea of the Fallen Pine Watch Hold, bound by law and public oath to Alistair of Bloodpeak, just happened to be playing games of courtly affection on a freezing terrace while your betrothed drank my wine in the hall? It was to break the bond with Alistair. The confession burst from her, propelled by terror. My grandmother's lore, a willing gift before the moon's peak severs the prior claim. I needed to give it to someone, anyone else. Matthias seemed safe. Safe. Torin repeated the word as if dissecting a strange new insect. You sought to use my brother's gentle nature as a tool for your escape, to transfer a curse onto him, and then what? Pluck it back? Disappear? Leaving him tied to a woman legally bound to a rival alpha, sparking a diplomatic incident that could shatter the border accords? He shook his head, a short, dismissive movement. No, this is not the plan of a frightened girl. This is the gambit of a desperate house. Did Alistair put you to this? A poisoned gift to weaken the crown from within? Or is this your family's final, futile play for relevance, using forbidden magic to snag a prince? The injustice of it. The catastrophic misreading stole her breath. My family is dead. My relevance is ash. I want it out. I would rather be damned to the wilds than be bound to my father's murderer. For the first time, a flicker of something, not belief, but a reassessment, crossed his face. It was gone in an instant, buried under layers of regal suspicion. He began to pace, a wolf circling its territory. Your grandmother, the exiled priestess, she taught you the old transfer rites. Dangerous heresy. He stopped, his gaze piercing her. The ring's magic is old, stronger than I anticipated. I can feel it. Rooting. A shiver of that same sensation crawled up Thea's spine. It wasn't just a link. It was an invasive growth, sending fine, hair-like threads of awareness into her psyche. She could feel the formidable weight of his control, the sheer wall of his will. It doesn't matter what you intended, he said finally, his voice returning to its cold, pragmatic tone. The result is a political earthquake. I have publicly claimed you. To recant now would be seen as weakness, as magic gone awry, inviting every challenger to question the stability of my reign. Alistair, meanwhile, has been publicly cuckolded. His property, as he sees it, has been stolen by the crown. He will not let that stand. As if summoned by his words, a sound came at the door. Not a knock, but a swift, urgent scrape. Torin's jaw tightened. Enter. A guardsman, his face pale, stepped in and bowed. He carried not a scroll but a crude dagger, its blade stained dark. Impaled on its tip was a folded piece of parchment. He offered it, hilt first, to Torin. My king. This was found driven into the postern gate. Torin took the dagger. He didn't flinch. He pulled the parchment free, let the dagger clatter to the stone floor, and unfolded the note. Thea watched his eyes scan the lines. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room grew heavier, colder. The bond flooded with a chilling, focused wrath that was entirely different from his earlier personal fury. This was the wrath of a king. Without a word, he held the note out to her. Her hands trembled as she took it. The script was brutal, slashing. "Ravenscar, you have stolen what is mine under moon law and warrior's right. The woman, Thea, is my bonded, pledged, and ringed. Her value is mine to set. Return her before the next sunset, unharmed. Her price is your withdrawal from the Silver Run Valley and the cession of the 3 western watchtowers. Fail, and I will take her back with the blood of your border guards as my levy. Alistair, Alpha of Blood Peak." The words swam before her eyes. Her value, a price, cession of lands. She was no longer a person, but a disputed territory, a casus belli. The parchment smelled of pine and iron, Alistair's scent. It made her nauseous. "He names his price," Torrin said, his voice dangerously quiet. He plucked the note from her nerveless fingers. "He does not want you back because he longs for his fated mate. He wants to prove he can make a king bow. He uses you as the lever." He threw the note into the fire. It blackened, curled, and vanished in a small flare of angry light. "This is no longer about a bond. It is about the integrity of the realm. If I give you up, I surrender territory. I invite every petty alpha to test my borders with a kidnapped bride. If I keep you, he will attack. Men will die. Villages will burn." Thea felt the walls of the beautiful room closing in, the gilded carvings turning to bars. "So what is your solution?" Her voice was a whisper. He turned his full, formidable attention back to her. "We perform the bond, publicly, fully, before the moon peaks in 4 nights. Her heart stopped. "What?" The initial claim was one thing. The completed ritual is another. It will cement the bond in the eyes of the gods and the law. It will make you irrevocably queen consort of Ravenspire. It removes you from the category of stolen property and places you firmly as a monarch of a rival realm. To attack, then, is not to reclaim a bride, but to make war on a kingdom. The stakes are higher. It may give even Alistair pause. You would bind yourself to me? Permanently? Knowing it was a mistake?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "The binding is already happening. The ring is doing its work. The ritual is a formality for the crowd, a symbol of unity. Our unity is the only thing that might prevent a war." He stepped closer, and she saw the ruthless king fully unveiled. "You will stand beside me at the moonstone altar. You will say the words. You will wear the crown I place on your head. You will look as if you chose this, as if your heart flies to mine." His gaze bored into her, leaving no room for illusion. "Your performance, Thea, will be measured in lives. The sincerity of your smile could be worth 100 soldiers. The warmth in your eyes might spare a village. Do you understand?" She understood. She was no longer a prisoner of a man, but a weapon of state. Her body, her face, her pretended affections were now instruments of policy. The personal had been utterly consumed by the political, and yet the lock on this new cage was the most personal thing imaginable. A soul-deep bond with a man who saw her as a strategic asset, a mistake to be weaponized. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the heavy iron ring. "Rest. My servants will attend you. From this moment, you are being watched, judged, and measured. The next move is yours. Choose your performance wisely." He left, closing the door softly behind him. The thud of the bolt sliding home was the loudest sound she had ever heard. Thea sank to the floor, the cold of the stones seeping through her thin slippers and the silk of her gown. She stared at the fire, seeing not flames, but the future. A lifetime of a role, bound to a stranger whose touch was calculation, whose heart was a frozen citadel. The ring's absence on her finger was a physical ache, a ghost limb. But she could feel its presence, a sphere of cold, potent fire anchored to Torrin, a leash that tied her not just to him, but to the fate of a kingdom she never wanted. Outside, carried on the thin, high mountain wind, she heard the first clear, mournful note of a wolf horn from the distant border. Alistair's answer. The performance had already begun. The wolf horn's note frayed into the mist, but its echo lingered in Thea's bones for 3 long days. The tower chamber became her world, its silence punctuated by the shuffle of servants' feet, the clatter of trays, and the low, urgent murmur of voices from the courtyard far below. Marshalling troops, strengthening gates. The air tasted of impending snow and cold iron. Servants came at dawn on the third day, their faces polite masks. They did not speak to her as they filled a copper tub before the fire, scattering dried lavender and bitter valerian root into the steaming water. The bath was a ritual, not of cleansing, but of erasure. They scrubbed the scent of pine and fear from her skin, the last traces of her old life sluicing away in the scented water. Her hair was washed, combed with oil that smelled of winter roses, a scent favored by the court, foreign and cloying. The gown they brought was not white, but the deep, fathomless blue of the Ravenscar banner, woven through with silver threads that caught the light like chainmail. It was heavy, a masterpiece of tailoring that fitted her form perfectly, yet felt like wearing someone else's skin. The sleeves were long, tipped with silver filaments meant to mimic claws. The neckline was high, severe, framing her face like the setting for a jewel, a prisoner's finery. As a silent woman pinned a silver circlet, too plain to be a crown, too significant to be mere ornament, into her hair, Thea caught her own reflection in a polished shield propped against the wall. A stranger stared back. Pale, hollow-eyed, her lips a tight, bloodless line. A queen of ice and dread. The bond was a constant, low-grade hum now, a vibration in her teeth. Torin was a distant storm cloud on the horizon of her awareness, a pressure system of controlled intensity. She could feel the focus of his mind, a blade being honed, but none of his thoughts. It was like standing outside a fortified city, feeling the rumble of activity within, but barred from the gates. He came for her at moonrise. The door opened without a knock. He stood there, and for a heart-stopping moment, he was not the calculating king of the tower, but something older, wilder. He wore black, the fabric swallowing the light, broken only by the stark white of his linen shirt and the muted gleam of a silver torque at his throat. His hair was tied back, severe, emphasizing the sharp lines of his face. His eyes found hers immediately, gray and unreadable. The ring on his finger seemed to pulse in time with her own quickening heartbeat. "It is time," he said. No ceremony, no false comfort. He offered his arm. It was a command, not a courtesy. Thea's hand, when she placed it on the heavy wool of his sleeve, was ice cold. The moment her skin made contact, the bond surged. A jolt, not of pain, but of acute, shocking awareness. She didn't just touch fabric and muscle. She felt the coiled strength beneath, the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart, the iron discipline holding a universe of tension in check. She flinched, but his other hand came over hers, trapping it there. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "Breathe," he murmured, the word for her alone. "And remember the price of a poor performance." They descended the spiral stairs, their footsteps the only sound. The fortress felt different, emptied, waiting. Then they reached the great doors to the inner bailey. Torchlight bled through the cracks. She heard the crowd, a low, restless animal sound of hundreds holding their breath. The doors swung outward. The cold hit her first, a slap that stole her breath. Then the light. 1,000 torches and lanterns turned the snow-dusted bailey into a bowl of wavering gold. And the people, packed shoulder to shoulder, wolves and humans alike, their faces upturned, a sea of expectation and raw curiosity. A path had been cleared to a central dais, where a rough-hewn altar of moonstone gleamed, bathed in the pale, growing light of the rising moon. The walk was an eternity. Every eye was a weight. She felt the scrutiny like physical touches, assessing her gait, her pallor, the distance between her and the king. She kept her chin level, her eyes fixed on the altar, her hand frozen on Torin's arm. He walked with a predator's grace, slow, deliberate, owning the space between them and the stone. Through the bond, she felt not a flicker of his personal feeling, only a towering, focused will. Project, unify, command. They reached the dais. The ancient pack shaman, a wizened woman with eyes like river stones, waited. Her voice, when she began the invocation, was a dry rustle that somehow carried to the furthest walls. She spoke of the Moon Mother, of bonds forged in spirit and strength, of unity before the pack. Thea's mind went blank. The words were just sounds. Her entire being was focused on the moment the shaman took her left hand and Torin's right, the hand that bore the ring, and placed them together on the cold, smooth surface of the moonstone. The world exploded into silence. The crowd vanished. The cold vanished. There was only the point of contact, her palm against his, the ring a burning coal between their joined flesh. The ritual magic, ancient and deep, surged up from the stone and pulled. It was an interrogation of the soul. It sought the truth of their connection, and finding the raw, tangled mess of mistake, fear, and political necessity, it did not reject it. It amplified it. The bond, already active, was now cinched tight, a rope yanked with brutal force. Thea gasped, her knees buckling, but Torin's hand tightened, holding her upright, his own body rigid beside her. And in that blinding, white-hot cascade of union, the walls cracked. Not his controlled fortress, but her own. Her terror, her grief for her father, her choking hatred for Alistair, her devastating loneliness. It all surged out of her, down that electrified connection, a torrent of raw, undefended feeling. She couldn't stop it. It was the ritual, tearing her open. And back came, not words, not images, but sensations. A fatigue so profound it was an ache in every joint. The crushing granite weight of a kingdom's needs. The bitter taste of constant vigilance. And beneath it all, a hollow, echoing solitude so vast and so carefully ignored, it felt like a physical void within him. This was not the calculated king. This was the man inside the crown. The cost of his power. The price of his control. It was not shared willingly. It was stolen by the moon's invasive magic, and the shock of it, the profound, unexpected intimacy, was a violation for them both. The shaman's voice rose to a crescendo. Torin, his face a pale, stony mask, was forced to speak the vows. By blood and bond, by moon and marrow, I claim you. His voice was hollow, stripped of all meaning, but the magic took it, weaving it into the fabric of the connection. Then it was her turn. Thea's mouth was dry. She looked at their joined hands, at the ring, at the crowd waiting for her lie. She thought of border guards, of villages, of the wolf horn's mournful cry. She opened her mouth. By blood and bond, she whispered, the words scraping her throat. By moon and marrow. She forced her eyes to his. In his gray gaze, she saw the reflection of the ritual's fire, and beneath it, the same stunned, ravaged feeling that was tearing through her. I accept. The shaman bound their wrists with a silver cord. The crowd erupted, not a cheer of joy, but a roar of acknowledgement, a seismic release of tension. It was done. Back in the royal chambers, connected rooms, a shared sitting space between two bedrooms, the silence was a living thing. The door shut on the distant noise of the feasting that had begun without them. The bond hummed, a live wire now encased in the formal seal of ritual, stronger, more pervasive. Torin stood across the room, his back to her, shoulders stiffer than she'd ever seen. He ripped the silver cord from his wrist and flung it into the fire. It sparked, sizzled, and was gone. Your performance was adequate, he said, his voice tight. Something in Thea snapped. The terror, the violation, the weight of the entire monstrous charade collapsed on her. Adequate? The word was a shard of glass. I just sold my soul in a marketplace for the adequate preservation of your borders. He turned, his eyes blazing. You think this is what I wanted? This tether to a stranger? This vulnerability forced upon me? You unleashed a chaos you cannot comprehend. I was trying to survive. You turned my survival into a political strategy. Everything is strategy, he roared, the kingly control finally fracturing. From the moment you put that ring on my finger, strategy was all that was left. Your survival, my sovereignty, the kingdom's stability, they are all threads in the same noose. They were shouting now, feet apart, the bond vibrating with their fury. It wasn't just an argument, it was a psychic feedback loop. Each angry word amplified by the magic, hurling their emotions back and forth with increasing force. The careful walls they'd each maintained were crumbling under the post-ritual aftershock and the raw, unvarnished truth of their predicament. "You feel nothing but contempt for the tool you've been handed?" she cried, tears of rage and helplessness finally spilling over. "I feel nothing but the wrongness of it," he shot back, gesturing violently at the space between them. "A bond should be a choice, a discovery, not this ambush of the spirit." The word ambush hung in the air. The raw truth of it, from both sides, left them gasping. The fury peaked, crested, and in its wake left a terrifying, intimate void. They were panting, staring at each other across the sumptuous rug, two souls wounded by the same trap. And the bond, in that sudden, breathless quiet, did something new. It didn't just carry anger. It flooded with the aftermath. Her shaking limbs, the salt taste of her tears, the hollow ache of her despair. His racing heart. The tremor in his hands he hid in fists. The profound, disorienting shock of being psychically laid bare. The alienation was absolute. And yet in that moment, it was also shared. They were alone. Together. Torin took a step towards her, then another. Not with purpose, but with a kind of devastating gravity. The air crackled. The heat from the fire was suddenly oppressive. The scent of winter roses and wood smoke and their own heightened sweat filled the space. He stopped before her. His gaze was no longer that of a king, but of a man unraveled. He saw her tears. He raised a hand, slowly, as if moving through deep water. His thumb brushed a wet trail from her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight through the bond and into her core. It was not tenderness. It was a collision. A dam broke. The last vestiges of strategy, of performance, of thought itself, evaporated. What followed was not love, not desire as she understood it. It was a furious, desperate acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability and trust. His mouth found hers. It was a kiss that was a surrender and a confirmation. Her hands fisted in the black wool of his doublet, not to push away, but to anchor herself in the storm. The bond, which had been a channel of conflict, became a conduit of pure, overwhelming sensation. Every touch was doubled, felt on her skin and echoed in his mind. The shift of their movements, the shock of cold air against their hands, the warmth of their shared proximity, it was all experienced in a dizzying feedback loop of emotional intensity. It was consuming, terrifying, and utterly, profoundly real in a way nothing had been since her father died. It was raw, elemental, a forging in fire. And when it was over, when they lay spent in the wreckage of sheets and pretense, the silence returned. But it was a different silence. The bond still hummed, but the note had changed. The wrongness was gone, replaced by a heavy, pulsating awareness, a live circuit that had been tested to its limit and held. The fire had burned down to embers. In the near dark, his voice came, rough and stripped bare. "Your grandmother." A pause. The words hung in the dark, heavier than any vow. She was Livinch, wasn't she? The heretic priestess they cast out for teaching the old ways. Thea froze, the warmth of his body beside her turning to ice. How could he know that name? Her grandmother's true name was a secret buried with her. He felt her shock through the bond. He turned his head on the pillow. In the dim glow, his eyes were fathomless pools. "I know," he said quietly, "because my father had her exiled. He feared what she knew. About the true nature of moon-forged bonds. About rings that don't just bind, but choose." Thea's breath stopped. The world which had narrowed to this room, this bed, this new terrifying connection, suddenly yawned open into a much darker, deeper chasm. The mistake had never been hers alone. The words, "rings that don't just bind but choose," hung in the dark like smoke from the dying fire. Thea lay perfectly still, the heat of Torin's body beside her now feeling like a lie. The intimacy of moments before curdled, replaced by a chilling sense of descent into a deeper, darker game. "What do you mean?" Her voice was a scratch in the silence. Torin didn't answer immediately. He shifted, turning onto his back to stare at the canopy above. The bond between them thrummed with a new, complex frequency, the fading echo of physical satiation, the cold shock of his own disclosure, and a weary, relentless gravity. "My father was a fearful king," he began, his voice low and stripped of its usual commanding resonance. It was just a voice in the dark, recounting a crime. "He feared magic he couldn't control. Your grandmother, Ilara, was the last true archivist of the old moon rites. She taught that the forging of a bonding ring was a dialogue. The maker's intent was one half. The moon's magic and the metal's memory were the other. A ring could resist a false pairing. It could seek consonance." He paused. "My father heard this as heresy, that objects could defy the will of alphas, could upset the natural order of claim and possession. He had her stripped of her rank and driven into the wilds before I was old enough to remember her face." Thea's mind raced, splintering the last 3 days. The ring's burning discomfort with Alistair. Its violent, almost eager blaze when she'd slid it onto Torin's finger. Not a mistake. A choice? "You're saying the ring wanted you?" "I'm saying its magic recognized something mine," he corrected, a sharp, analytical edge returning. "A compatibility of spirit, perhaps, or a strategic alignment on a metaphysical level. My father feared that knowledge. I had forgotten it." He turned his head toward her again. In the gloom, his profile was stark. "Until I felt it snap into place. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a lock turning in a door I didn't know was there." The implications unfolded like a poisonous flower. Her desperate gambit had been guided by a will beyond her own. Her grandmother's lore had been the map, but the ring itself had been the compass, steering her catastrophic course to the one man in the kingdom whose father had tried to bury its truth. It was not fate. It was a reckoning. "You knew," she breathed, horror dawning. "When I told you about my grandmother in the tower, you already understood what the ring could do. You didn't believe me, but you understood the mechanism." "I understood the potential," he admitted. No shame, just cold fact. "It confirmed my suspicion that you were a political weapon, yes. But it also presented a unique variable. A bond with a will of its own is unpredictable. In strategy, unpredictable variables are either eliminated or integrated." "Integrated," she echoed, the word tasting of metal. She was a variable, integrated into his rule. Before she could spiral further, a fist rapped sharply on the outer chamber door. Torin's entire body tensed, the king slamming back into place over the man who had just shared his father's sins. "Enter." A guardsman, eyes carefully averted from the rumpled bed, stood at the threshold. "My king, the War Council assembles at your command. The scouts have returned from the border. I will be there shortly." The man bowed and retreated. The shared intimacy was gone, shattered by the outside world. Torin rose, a shadow moving with efficient grace, gathering his discarded clothes. Thea pulled the fur covers up to her chin, feeling exposed in a new way. He dressed in silence, the bond awash with a rapid shift from introspection to tactical focus. As he fastened his sword belt, he spoke without looking at her. "You will attend." It was not a request. Thea blinked. "The War Council? Why?" He finally met her eyes. "Because you are no longer just a variable. You are a piece on the board with a unique perspective. You know Alistair. You have seen his tactics firsthand. And because," he added, his voice dropping, "the men must see their king and queen united even here. Especially here." An hour later, Thea entered the map room, a place of stone and sober purpose. The air was thick with the scent of nervous sweat, cold steel, and the ozone tang of fear. Torin stood at the head of a massive oak table scarred with generations of use, his hands resting on a spread parchment. A dozen alphas and senior commanders stood around it, their faces grim. All eyes snapped to her as she entered, a wave of scrutiny that felt heavier than at the bonding ritual. Torin didn't smile. He simply extended a hand. "Queen Thea." The title in this context was a weapon. She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses, the strength, the now familiar psychic hum of his focused presence. He drew her to stand beside him at the head of the table. The message was clear. She was not an ornament, but a partner in this grim calculus. "Report," Torrin said, his gaze on a grizzled scout with mud on his boots. The scout's voice was gravel. "Bloodpeak forces, sire. At least 500 strong camped at the Stoneford. They've taken the border fort at Greywatch." A low rumble of anger went around the table. A broad-shouldered alpha slammed a fist on the table. "Greywatch was held by 20 men. They were to observe, not hold against an army." "They didn't hold," the scout said, his face pale. "Alistair. He used the old law of passage, offered safe conduct for the garrison if they surrendered the fort. When they marched out, unarmed, he cut them down. To the last man. He called it cleansing a nest of oath-breakers. Their commander, Rylan, he was spiked on the fort's own gate. The name, Rylan, hit Thea like a physical blow. A friend of her father's, a man who had taught her to track rabbits when she was 6. She saw his kind, weathered face, now contorted in death. A small, wounded sound escaped her before she could stop it. Every head turned to her. Torrin's hand tightened on hers, not in comfort, but in warning. "Stay with me." "He uses my father's death as his template," Thea said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her soul. The room fell silent, listening to the Queen speak of war. The lawful challenge, the promise of honor, then the brutality after the terms are met. He doesn't just want victory. He wants to demonstrate that all old laws, all old loyalties, are meaningless before his will. Greywatch wasn't a strategic necessity. It was a message. She felt Torrin's attention sharpen beside her. A focused beam of approval through the bond. The commanders were nodding, some with grim respect. "He'll do the same at the next fort," said another alpha. "The Weir, it guards the pass to the Silver Run Valley." The Silver Run, her father's valley, the land Alistair had first demanded as her price. Thea's breath caught. She looked at the map, at the small inked symbol for the Weir. She remembered the fort, a smaller, older place built into the cliffside. She remembered playing in its lower caves as a child. "He'll expect a traditional relief force," Torrin mused, his finger tracing the path from Ravenspire to the Weir. "To meet him on the field before the fort. He has the numbers for a protracted siege there, but he won't wait. He wants a decisive, bloody battle to prove his point." An idea, terrible and clear, formed in Thea's mind. It came not from strategy, but from memory, from a child's secret. "Don't meet him on the field." All eyes were on her again. Torrin's gaze was piercing. "Explain." "The Weir is built on a fault in the rock. There's a lower entrance, a cave system that runs from the riverbank up into the lower storerooms. It was sealed when I was a child, after a flood. But the seal is old stone and mortar, not bedrock." She pointed to a spot on the map the cartographer had left blank. A small group could approach under the river mist, breach the seal, and enter the fort from within. Not to hold it, but to open the main gates for a cavalry charge at dawn, when Alistair's forces are focused on the walls. The room was silent, considering. The risk was astronomical. "You know this entrance?" Torrin asked, his voice neutral. "I played in it." "I know the path." "Then you will show us on a more detailed survey," he said, his decision made. He looked around the table. "We take the risk, but not with a small group. I will lead the infiltration." Protests erupted. "My king, you cannot. If this fails, the kingdom falls with me." Torrin cut across them, his voice final. "And she comes with me." Thea's blood ran cold. "What?" He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the ruthless integration complete. "You are the only one who knows the way. And your presence at my side, inside a fort he thinks he's besieging, is the ultimate symbol. He will see that his stolen property is not a prize to be won back, but a queen fighting for her kingdom. It breaks his narrative. It breaks him." It was madness. It was brilliance. It was a death sentence or a coronation. The bond flooded with his absolute, terrifying resolve, and beneath it, a thread of something else. Not trust, but a raw, pragmatic reliance. He was staking everything on her memory and her will. The council dissolved into frantic planning. As commanders began barking orders, A slight figure slipped into the back of the room, unnoticed by most. Prince Matthias. His face was drawn, his eyes ringed with shadow. He caught Thea's gaze and gave a slight, desperate shake of his head, then retreated into the corridor. Excusing herself, Thea followed him, her heart hammering. She found him in an alcove, wringing his hands. "Matthias?" He jumped. "Thea, I have to speak to you. I should have found you sooner, but the shock, the bonding." He took a shuddering breath. "The night of the solstice ball. You came to me on the terrace." "I came to find you," she whispered, the old panic flickering. "I know. I saw you, I was coming to you, but a courtier, Lord Selwyn's man, intercepted me, said there was an urgent discrepancy in the treaty texts I was reviewing, required my immediate attention. It seemed plausible." He looked sick with guilt. "It was a ruse. I've since had the man questioned. He's in Alistair's pay." The world tilted. Thea leaned against the cold stone wall. "Alistair? He knew my plan?" "He must have suspected you'd try something. He couldn't watch you every moment in the crowd, so he made sure that when you sought the one safe harbor you'd identified, that harbor was redirected, leaving you adrift to make the mistake with my brother." Matthias's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He never intended to let you break the bond. He engineered the crisis. He wanted you to bond with the king. It gives him the ultimate righteous cause. A king stealing another alpha's fated mate. It unites the more traditional packs behind him. It was never about getting you back. It was about getting a war he could win." The pieces slammed together with a soundless, devastating crash. Her grandmother's ring, seeking a true consonance. Alistair's machinations, steering her toward the one man whose bond would ignite the realm. She hadn't been a pawn in Torrhen's game. She had been the incendiary device in Alistair's. She was not the mistake. She was the catalyst. She walked back into the map room in a daze. Torrhen was alone now, studying the map with fierce concentration. He felt her re-enter, felt the seismic shift in her through the bond, and looked up. "What is it?" she told him, her voice flat, hollow. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then a slow, grim smile touched his lips, a predator's smile. "So, he thinks he has been clever. He thinks he has manipulated a king into a war over a woman." He placed his hands back on the map, over the Silver Run Valley. "Then we will show him what a war for a woman truly looks like. And we will show him the woman." He straightened. "We ride at first light. You will be fitted for armor. You will ride at my side. And when we take back the weir, you will stand on its walls where he can see you." Thea looked at the ring on his finger, then at her own bare hand. The ghost weight was gone. She no longer felt its absence. She felt only the terrifying, thrumming connection to the man before her, and the bloody path that lay ahead. She was a variable that had been integrated, a catalyst that would now be wielded. She nodded, the queen accepting her role, the weapon embracing its purpose. "I will stand on the walls," she said. And for the first time it felt like a promise, not a performance. The dawn was not a color, but a sound. The brittle crunch of frost under hooves, the jangle of bit and bridle, the low, steady thunder of 500 hearts beating toward battle. Thea rode at Torrhen's left shoulder, encased in leathers and light steel that felt both alien and strangely anchoring. The armor smelled of oil and old fear, but it was hers. Through the bond, she felt the immense living organism of the war column stretched out behind them. A current of tension, resolve, and dread that flowed into Torrhen, and, through him, vibrated in her own bones. He was the calm, still center of the storm, his focus so absolute it was like riding next to a monolith. They left the main force in a hidden copse a mile from the weir. 20 warriors, hand-picked and grim-faced, would follow them into the earth. The Silver Run Valley unfolded below, draped in river mist that coiled like phantom wolves. And there, clinging to the cliff like a limpet, was the weir, her father's fort. Alistair's banners, a bloody peak on a grey field, hung limp from its walls. The sight was a fist around her heart. The descent to the riverbank was a treacherous slide of wet rock and clinging roots. The mist here was thick, cold as a shroud. muffling sound. The river itself was a rushing, silver-gray beast. Torin moved with a predator's silence, and Thea found herself mirroring him, her childhood memory guiding her feet as much as her eyes. She led them to an overhang of black rock, half submerged in the icy water. "There," she whispered, pointing to a darker patch where the water swirled. "The entrance is submerged, but it opens into an air pocket a few feet in." Torin didn't hesitate. He slid into the water without a sound, the others following. Thea took a breath and plunged. The cold was a shock that stole her breath. The water pushed, pulled, blinded her. Then strong hands, Torin's, guided her through a crack in the rock, and she surfaced into dripping, utter blackness. The air was stale, smelling of wet stone and ancient rot. Light was struck, a single shielded lantern. They stood in a cavern, the ceiling low. Ahead, a tumble of rock and old mortar sealed a passage. "Your memory holds true," Torin murmured, his voice echoing softly. He placed a hand on the seal, testing. He nodded to two burly warriors with quiet hammers and pry bars. Quickly and quietly. The work was agonizing. Each crack of stone on mortar seemed deafening. Thea strained her senses, listening for any alarm from above, feeling only the tense, collective breath of the men and the steady, assessing pulse of Torin through the bond. He was everywhere, checking the progress, watching the dark water behind them, his gaze constantly returning to her, a silent anchor. With a final, grating sigh, a man-sized chunk of the seal gave way. A colder draft flowed out, carrying the faint scent of torch smoke and packed earth. The way was open. They filed into a narrow, ascending tunnel. Thea's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the path of her childhood games, now a artery of war. The sounds from the fort above grew clearer. The muffled tread of boots on stone, a distant laugh, the clang of a smithy. They emerged into a cellar, stacked with crumbling sacks of long-spoiled grain. Torin held up a fist. Silence. He pointed, dispatching men to secure the stairs. To find the gatehouse mechanism. His plan was unfolding with clockwork precision. Then a shout from above. Not an alarm, but a voice raised in cruel jest. "Think the Ravenscar king will come crying for his stolen whore?" Laughter. Thea froze. Torin's head turned slowly toward the sound. Through the bond, she felt the first true crack in his glacial control. A flash of pure, incandescent rage so hot and personal it seared her. It was gone in an instant, banked into something more dangerous. A cold, murderous focus. He changed the plan with a series of sharp hand signals. Speed, overwhelm. They took the stairs. What followed was not a battle, but a swift, violent exorcism. Thea stayed close to Torin, a dagger in her hand. Her world narrowed to the movement of his body, the arc of his sword, the psychic symphony of his intent. He fought with a terrifying, economical grace. He was not a warrior showing off. He was a force of nature, removing obstacles. The bond sang with it, not with bloodlust, but with a profound, protective fury that left her breathless. He was not just reclaiming a fort. He was silencing an insult he would not let her hear. They burst onto the inner courtyard. Dawn was breaking, painting the mist in rose and gold. Alistair's men, caught between sleep and duty, scrambled. The Ravenspire warriors, fueled by momentum and their king's example, cut through them. And then, from the keep's main doors, he appeared, Alistair. He wore no armor, only his alpha's furs. His eyes found Thea immediately, and a smile of pure, vicious possession spread across his face. Then he saw Torin at her side, and the smile twisted into a snarl. "Thief!" he roared, his voice echoing off the stone. "You dress my property in steel and think it changes her nature? The bond you stole is a sham, a magical trick." He drew his sword, a heavy, brutal thing. "I claim her under the old law, warrior's challenge, for the right of the bond. Do you hide behind your crown, Ravenscar, or do you face me like a wolf?" A hush fell over the fighting. This was the ancient way. Personal. Absolute. To refuse was to be forever branded coward, to undermine every claim of strength. Torin didn't even look at Thea. He stepped forward, stripping off his gauntlets. "The bond is no sham," he said, his voice carrying, calm and lethal. "But I will face you, for the right to never hear your voice speak of her again." The duel began not with a clash, but with a circling silence. Two alpha powers collided in the space between them, Alistair's, a hot, aggressive wave of dominance, Torrens, a deep, implacable pressure like the mountain itself. They closed, steel rang. It was not the elegant fencing of courts. It was raw, powerful, brutal. Alistair was stronger, fueled by wrath and a sense of stolen property. Torren was faster, smarter, every parry and strike a lesson in controlled violence. Thea watched, her hand pressed to her mouth, living every near miss through the bond. She felt the jarring impact up Torren's arm, the swift calculation of distance, the cold burn of a shallow slice along his ribs. His pain was a bright, sharp flare in her own side. Alistair fought dirty. He feinted high, then kicked dust into Torren's eyes. Torren reeled back, blinking. Alistair lunged, his blade aiming not for a kill, but to maim, to disable. And from his sleeve a sliver of silver caught the dawn light. A concealed dagger. Wolf's bane. Thea screamed a warning that was lost in the roar of the crowd. Torren sensed it, not through sight, but through the bond's sudden, screaming spike of her terror. He twisted, avoiding the main thrust, but the silver edge scored a line of fire across his bicep. A wound from silver to a wolf was poison, a slow, weakening burn. Alistair pressed his advantage, his smile returning. "See how your king bleeds, Thea? He is just a man. I am your fate." Torren staggered, his movements slowing. The bond flooded with a corrosive, burning pain and a frustrating, weakening fog. The men around them murmured. Alistair's warriors cheered. Thea stood frozen, the world narrowing to Torren's labored breath, the gleam of the cursed ring on his finger. The triumphant glow in Alistair's eyes. Her grandmother's words whispered again, but differently now. The ring seeks consonance. It chooses. It had chosen Torren. Not just to bind, but to link. It wasn't a chain. It was a conduit. Her desperation crystallized into a single, insane point of focus. She didn't move toward them. She closed her eyes. She reached not for the ring, but for the connection. For the humming, living thread of moon-forged magic that tied her soul to Torren's. She felt its depth, its strength, its purpose. And she felt, like a rotten cord woven beside it, the older, fraying tie that had once connected her to Alistair. The tie the ring had severed but whose ghost remained, a channel of his obsession. She took hold of the bond with Torren, not to pull, but to push. She poured her own will, her fury, her love for her father and her stolen home, down that conduit. She fed his strength with hers. And then, with the refined, precise instinct of the granddaughter of a heretic priestess, she used their joined power to find the ghost tie to Alistair, and sear it. It was not a physical attack. It was metaphysical surgery. On the field, Alistair raised his sword for a final blow, and then he spasmed. He didn't cry out in pain, but in something far worse, existential shock. His eyes went wide, vacant. For a heartbeat, he looked utterly, profoundly lost. The constant underlying awareness of his own dominance, his claim, his possessive link to the world, it vanished. He was adrift, a king without a country, an alpha severed from his own primal certainty. It was the opening, a lifetime. Torren, sensing the shift through the bond, understanding without words what she had done, found a last reservoir of strength. He moved, not with kingly grace, but with the final, killing strike of a wolf who has endured everything. His blade took Alistair in the heart. Not a triumphant blow, but a quiet, definitive one. Alistair fell. The sound was not dramatic, just a heavy thud on the cold stones of the weir. The fighting ceased. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sigh of the wind in the valley below. Torren stood over his fallen rival, breathing heavily, the poison from the silver wound leaching the strength from his limbs. He looked across the suddenly still courtyard, past his own stunned men, past the defeated Blood Peak warriors. His eyes found Thea. He walked toward her, Mei Yi Bu a testament to his will. the dawn sun broke fully over the cliffs, bathing the courtyard in gold. He stopped before her, the battle's fury still etched in the lines of his face, but something else in his gray eyes, a clarity, a wonder, a dawning, terrible understanding. He looked at the ring on his finger, the ring that had chosen him, the ring through which she had just poured her soul to save his. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled it off. The entire fortress held its breath. He took her left hand. His own was bloodied, trembling slightly from fatigue and silver toxicity. He didn't speak of victory, of queens, of strategy. His voice, when it came, was raw, stripped bare, meant only for her. "The magic was always yours?" he said, the words a vow more profound than any ritual. "The choice is now yours." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was warm from his skin. It settled into its old place as if it had never left. But everything was different. The metal didn't burn. It sang a quiet, perfect note of homecoming, of completion. The bond didn't roar, it deepened, widening into a vast, quiet channel of mutual, awestruck recognition. "Stay or go," Torin whispered, his gaze holding hers, offering not a crown, but a key. "The bond is real, my claim is real, but your will is your own." He turned then, facing the assembled warriors, both his and the defeated. He did not raise his sword in victory. He simply stood, bleeding and unbowed, beside the woman he had just, for the first time, truly set free. Thea looked down at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had given it back. She felt the entirety of the Silver Run Valley at her back, the ghost of her father in the stones, the living, complex, wounded soul of the king beside her. The war was over. The performance was done. All that remained was the terrifying, glorious, uncharted territory of a choice that was finally, irrevocably, hers.